Welcome back to MMA Surge. I'm your host, Andrew Montanez. This year in the UFC, we may have some new champions. These belts have been held onto for a long time, but we have guys like Chris Weidman fighting Anderson Silva, TJ Grant fighting Benson Henderson, and Johnny Hendricks fighting GSP. So by the end of the year, we may have 3 new champions. And it's not a new thing where some unlikely fighters have become champions. In the past, we've had a lot of unlikely champions and a lot of unlikely stars be born. So today I'm going to give you guys a list of the 3 most unlikely champions the UFC has ever had. At number 3, we have former lightweight champion Frankie Edgar. Even though Frankie Edgar has the current record for most consecutive title defenses in the lightweight division at 3, a lot of people always thought he'd never be a champion. He was one of the smaller fighters in the lightweight division. He even had to fight at lightweight because there was no 145-pound weight class. But at the time, BJ Penn was the champion. He was one of the more dominating champions, one of the best fighters of all time. And when Frankie Edgar got that fight with BJ Penn, everyone ruled him out. Everyone said, Frankie Edgar is going to get beat up, BJ Penn's going to get another title defense, and we're going to move on. And that did not happen. Frankie Edgar did not get dominated by BJ Penn. They fought each other at UFC 112 in Dubai, and Frankie Edgar looked great. He was able to use his size and his wrestling and his speed to beat BJ Penn. And everyone thought that was a fluke, so a few months later they fought each other in Boston, and Frankie Edgar dominated BJ Penn even more, using a lot of takedowns, speed, and movement, and shocking the world and showing them that you don't need to be the biggest fighter, that heart can really win a championship. And that's why Frankie Edgar is an unlikely champion, because when he first came in the UFC, no one would have thought he'd ever be the champion. And the number 2 most unlikely champion of the UFC is Matt Serra. Matt Serra has a crazy story. Nobody thought he would ever win a UFC title, and the way he did it is even more remarkable. In 2005 at UFC 53, Kyle Parisian defeated Matt Serra by decision. Not too big of a deal, but nobody thought Matt Serra would be in title contention. But the UFC did something a little different. They did Ultimate Fighter Season 4, The Comeback. And what they did was, instead of giving a fighter a contract with the UFC, they gave the winner of the Ultimate Fighter $100,000 and a shot at the UFC title. That means the winner of the show got to fight GSP. At this time, GSP was one of the most dominating fighters of all time. He was riding a 6-fight win streak. He defeated BJ Penn, Matt Hughes, Jason Mayhem Miller, Jay Heron. He was on a tear. And what Matt Serra did, he won this show methodically. After he defeated Chris Lytle by split decision in a very controversial fight, he got his title shot against George St. Pierre. And before this fight, everyone ruled out Matt Serra. Everyone was like, why does the winner of this reality show get to fight for the title? You're cutting the line. You don't get to fight for the title. But in this fight, Matt Serra came out guns blazing. He ended up clocking GSP with some big shots and finishing.
Serra buckles St. Pierre. St. Pierre down again. Serra is trying to upset St. Pierre.
Good Lord. He's hurt him 3 times in the last 60 seconds.
It is unbelievable. Serra is the new world.
If you watch his fight with GSP, he dominated GSP standing. Matt Serra is a black belt, he's an ace on the ground, he's an Abu Dhabi Combat Club grappling champion, and he beat GSP standing. Even though he technically got GSP to submit, it was through strikes. If you watch that fight, it says TKO, but right when the ref steps in, GSP taps, which makes it crazy. No one expected Matt Serra to knock out GSP and get him to tap. But the reason why he is one of the most unlikely champions of the UFC is that GSP got his rematch and dominated Matt Serra, brutally finishing with a TKO with knees to the body. Matt Serra moved on, fought Matt Hughes, another former champion, lost a decision, and in Matt Serra's final fight, as he is now retired, he fought Chris Lytle. And like I mentioned earlier, the first time he fought Chris Lytle, it was a controversial split decision that he won, which was the fight that got him to fight GSP. And the second time they fought, Chris Lytle won a unanimous decision, ending Matt Serra's career. So that's why Matt Serra is one of the most unlikely champions, because he came off a loss to Kyle Parisian, got into the Ultimate Fighter house, won a reality show in a tournament that he was not the favorite, and he knocked out GSP and ended his career losing 3 out of his last 4. So that's why he is the second most unlikely champion in the UFC. And number 1 on our list of most unlikely UFC champions is a man that won a tournament that had Royce Gracie, Ken Shamrock, Emmanuel Yarbrough, Kimo Leopoldo, and Keith Hackney in it. This man was Steve Jenham. Back in the day, the UFC used to hold these one-night tournaments where you'd have to essentially fight and win 3 fights to be crowned the UFC champion. On this night, we had some epic battles. This was UFC 3, so we had Royce Gracie, who won UFC 1 and UFC 2. In a very famous fight, he fought Kimo Leopoldo. If you guys don't know what Kimo Leopoldo is, type his name in. There'll probably be a video. He used to come out to the ring carrying a giant cross. Royce Gracie had a crazy fight with him. He won the fight, but had to withdraw from the tournament due to exhaustion. On the other side of the bracket, we had Ken Shamrock. Everyone thought this was going to be a Ken Shamrock, Royce Gracie final. But in the semifinals of the tournament, Ken Shamrock got injured and couldn't fight in the finals. After Royce Gracie's first fight, he was in the semifinals, but he had to forfeit to a man named Harold Howard. So Harold Howard moved into the finals. Ken Shamrock was injured, so his replacement is a Nebraska cop named Steve Jenham. Steve Jenham wasn't even supposed to fight this night, and he got a chance to move into the finals to fight Harold Howard. Steve Jenham came out blazing, landed some big strikes, and he won by submission due to strikes at 1 minute and 27 of the first round, making him a very unlikely champion because he wasn't even in this tournament. And this tournament, like I said, featuring some stars like Kimo, Ken Shamrock, and Royce Gracie, nobody thought the Nebraska cop Steve Jenham, a master of ninjutsu, would win this tournament. And that's why we have him as the most unlikely champion, because he wasn't even supposed to be in the tournament with some of the best guys in the world. So to recap our list of most unlikely UFC champions of all time, number 3, Frankie Edgar, a man who was way undersized for his weight class, and a world title fight against BJ Penn shocked the world in a fight where everyone thought he would lose. And that's why he's at number 3. And at number 2, Matt Serra, a man who won the Ultimate Fighter, taking a shortcut to the UFC title, and winning gold by defeating George St. Pierre. And number 1 on our list of most unlikely champions is Steve Jenham for winning UFC 3, winning a tournament he wasn't even supposed to be in. And I might have to keep adding to this list. We got guys with title shots like TJ Grant, Alexander Gustafsson, and Johnny Hendricks. You never know who's going to be the next UFC champion because all it takes is one punch. This list shows you that anyone can be champion, so who knows who's going to be holding that belt soon. I'm the Squid. Hope you enjoyed that list, and I'll see you next time on MMA Surge.